Welcome to the Boardroom Sessions podcast. In these sessions, we meet the most amazing and interesting people. We learn about their passions, their business models, cool new technologies, and of course, their lessons on personal growth. I hope you enjoy. In this Boardroom Sessions podcast, we meet Poli. John's a healthcare technology expert. He's been a CEO, a CIO. He's been a Gartner industry expert, currently with RingCentral today. We dive deep into self-service, trends going on in the healthcare right now, like telemedicine, RPA, AI, and much more. Hope you enjoy. Poli, let's welcome to the Boardroom Sessions podcast. Thanks for joining.
Nice to be here, Mike. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And so, you've been around. You've had roles as a CIO. You've had roles as a CEO. You're a Gartner industry expert at one point for many years on the healthcare industry, and now you've taken that knowledge and you're working at RingCentral as a healthcare vertical principal. Tell me what that role is, and give us a little background on how you got here.
Sure. Thanks for asking. The industry principal role at RingCentral primarily drives the strategy within the given vertical industry, in my case, healthcare. So my goal is to provide a clear and defined healthcare strategy for all the segments across the industry to make sure that we train, educate, and support our sales teams in their active pursuit of new clients, and also to work directly with clients to not only understand how our solution helps them, but also, as importantly, listening to them and how they're innovating with our solutions and what's happening in healthcare. So be the voice of the client, for lack of a better term, to help our product team continue to evolve our services and our products going forward.
So how'd you cut your chops in healthcare? What makes you an industry specialist, an industry expert?
Well, it begins back in the noughts. By around 2007, I had been in the infrastructure business for a while. Back in the 90s, I spent some time coming out of both my engineering degree and my military service, walked into the environment where I was primarily working with the telco industry in the 90s, that very rapid pace of change. When everything was changing with the concepts, I worked with Sprint for a while, Quest for a while, and then some startups within that same decade. And as I moved to the West Coast and started going up the stack to partners like EDS and Microsoft, I was looking for a change to get into some strategic industries that I felt were going to transform with technology. Healthcare was one of them. And in around 2007, I started consulting on some database work for healthcare with regards to the claim activity for a payer called Delta Dental. I then became the CIO there and really started to cut my teeth, bringing my technology background to the healthcare industry.
So you were the CIO at Delta Dental. That's a pretty big operation. So why don't you describe the size of the girth of that operation?
Well, the Delta Dental is a association of about 35 independent deltas from each of the states. Some of the states are consolidated. That's why there's not 50. We at Washington were one of the largest. At the time, it was called Washington Dental Service. Today, it's Delta Dental of Washington. As a CIO there, I was one of the executive leadership team members, defining strategy for the company moving forward. Our goal at the time was really to drive, obviously, the optimization of care, customer service to our members, information and support to the provider community, the dentists within the state, and also to help look at how, in many cases, the data collected over time around healthcare could start to be used for population health purposes. So one of the things we started doing back then was cutting our teeth on what was the impact of oral health on medical health. Because if you look at wellness as a whole, there's direct linkages in a number of areas. So things like periodontal disease, for example, has a direct impact on patients who are diabetics, on pregnancies, on
the mouth, the body
arteriosclerosis and other heart patients. That's correct. And so, we spent some time really looking at not only how to link those from a standpoint of care and care management that would optimize patient care, but more importantly, at least as a business, how do you start to compensate and drive the economic model that allows a payer to invest across that spectrum in that case. And so that was one of the first times I really looked at kind of how do we think about healthcare in a new way instead of transform it. So we spent a lot of time working on that and looking at what kind of collected data from a claims representation we could collect to really drive changing care and optimizing care.
Good. Real good. So at this point in time, your main role is to help interpret to RingCentral what healthcare means as a client base, right, and as a target market for RingCentral, and then to that target market, to the healthcare space, what the advantages are of moving to a unified communications platform like RingCentral. So, what are you seeing today? Where does Ring fit into the healthcare vertical, and where in particular do you see the healthcare vertical moving that we should be, I mean, it's moving in a lot of different directions, but which ones should we be paying attention to here in this technology space?
Well, at Ring, it's somewhat of a continuance of, I'd say, this very long-standing movement of healthcare from a standpoint of fee-for-service to accountable care, and moving to a situation where as our population ages, as the profile of Americans age and how they're dealing with their care and their wellness, RingCentral and its communication tools, particularly its cloud-based environment, becomes incredibly important to drive some of the delivery of care in the future. So when we look at a UCaaS or CCaaS platform, Unified Communications as a Service, which includes messaging, phone, and video, along with collaboration tools as an integrated whole, and CCaaS, which is Contact Center as a Service, which is an aggregated call center activity. These tools as a cloud-based entity become incredibly flexible and important, changing the way you can deliver not only administration of care facilities, providers, payers, and life sciences, but also the delivery of care itself. How you think about a patient community, how you think about a care management organization that helps per patient define care from the start of diagnosis all the way through post-treatment and into ongoing wellness. And so we believe these communication tools are fundamental. To your question on where it is, we're finding that RingCentral, while being one of the leaders in the world in cloud-based communications, we find that at the healthcare level, particularly as we move into the enterprise and larger acute care, we're at the very early stages of thinking through care management with the cloud. And what that means is rethinking a lot of the workflows that traditionally have been done on the floor of a hospital or within a clinic, thinking about how you do virtual rounds, how do you do references to specialists, how you integrate administration, pharmacy, physical therapy, and care providers themselves, how nurses work directly with doctors in the front desk. And so all those things can now be rethought, but it's a lot of work at the operational level. Chief medical officers, chief nursing officers are all part of that. So we're really targeting a broad swath of the community and listening all the time to find out which of those workflows become most advantageous for us to support and provide solutions to.
And so you mentioned a lot of different workflows. How are you finding when you're working on some of these accounts with the account team, how apt or receptive are some of these accounts to change the way they're doing business? Like virtual rounds, that's very different than the way they're used to doing it. Getting referrals and pulling together a three-way call with a couple of doctors versus the way they do it one-on-one conversations. How are they willing to adapt?
Well, traditionally it's been a challenge because in many cases your communications infrastructure, your voice and telephony have been utilities. And in many cases the operational roles, whether it's your nursing officer, your medical officer, didn't really worry about the infrastructure. If the phone was up and it worked, that was all they really worried about. So these new tools are basically exposing new areas of focus going forward. One of the interesting things that happened tactically is the COVID virus and the need to not only distribute staff, but also meet with patients remotely has somewhat was a catalyst for changing that perspective. As providers started to see that they can not only deliver care, but started to see that the virtual workforce could also deliver care in a unique way, it really, I think, opened eyes from a lot of providers to start to make the leap to say not only that can they build care around it, but they could enhance care by leveraging communication tools as an augment to the classic model of delivering care to patients.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the most unique ways in which you can find that there's an opportunity for someone to do things differently in their communication flow? For
Well, one of the things we
example, for example, I'll give you one that I know of. The emergency procedures that were needed during healthcare during COVID, right? So during the lockdown, there were some companies like dental offices, for example. They were not allowed to do business. They were shut down. It was
Mhm.
not considered non-essential unless it was an emergency. But then for emergency procedures, they were able to qualify clients with telemedicine, setting up a video call and having some proof that there was an impact and ability and a need, and then they were able to get that patient into the dental chair for service during COVID. That was unique and different. People were not using telemedicine prior to that for that use
Mhm.
case, and so I saw that happen quite a bit. And what other kind of examples have you seen that are here that are low hanging fruit for the clients?
One of the things we saw with people are doing a lot of creative things with our tools. That one of the things that one group mentioned was they set up in essence, a virtual triage environment. They put every patient into a different room. They put on a RingCentral video connection, and they basically monitored the patient remotely off a centralized environment using the multi-faceted video tools. And so they were able to kind of manage patients, keep them all separated, but still handle an in-room and handle disease and patients as they came in. What we're seeing with a lot of patients is the construct of integration of communication. So things like outbound messaging to make patients aware of vaccines or protections or issues or scheduling of vaccines. We found that some providers have shown significant improvements in the care profile and the death rate within an elderly community, for example, who are leveraging messaging tools maybe twice a day to ensure they were updating their patients about what was the best mode of attack, what was safe, what wasn't safe. And by using those communication tools to help people manage their own care, their own wellness, they were able to really reduce the rate and the risk for those patients. And so those are the kind of tools, that integration of the tools is very powerful. One of the things we really see going forward is as population health starts to take hold, what you're seeing now with a lot of accountable care is you want to keep patients out of the hospital. You want to keep them healthy and at home. A lot of that has to do with both having home diagnostic tools that allow doctors to see exactly what's going on with the patient as accurately as possible, but also being able to keep them and prevent them from having hospital stays. And by doing so, the cost of overall care gets reduced. And they really focus their time on the real chronic needs of the top 20% or so patients who really need to have active care from a doctor every day. Whereas with telemedicine, care teams, and messaging groups, you can create a care team that can remotely monitor patients for months, if not years at a time, remotely. So that combination is really going to be, I think, the model of the future going forward, where doctors are really dealing with patients who need the care with the limited facilities we have. And as elderly patients, as population ages, we manage most of that aging and wellness through remote activity tied to complete at-home diagnostic type environments.
Okay. So are there numbers are there people that are adopting more and more telemedicine and telereferrals and appointments?
Well, we've seen a spike, obviously, last year. I think we saw our traffic go up by a factor of 6 during the COVID months when they first hit with the ongoing video needs of the community at large. Now, as things are settling back to normal and appointments are being made in person, we're seeing the telehealth is still a very critical part of care. It's just becoming part of a composite of care where on-site visits tied to telehealth become the optimal way to treat patients. And we're finding that by doing so, not only with the video visits, but also with areas like messaging, follow-up, scheduling, automated tools on like an IVR system, you create a much better patient experience, right? They can get appointments when they want on their own time. They can manage potentially their prescriptions remotely. They can handle more of the basic blocking and tackling without having to go to an office and wait for to see a doctor. But at the same time, when they need their doctor and the doctor can diagnose it, they have the opportunity to see their doctor directly. So I think the combination of these tools now being integrated into a health profile is going to be very powerful going forward. And that's what we're focusing on with our solutions.
Very good. What about the age? There seems to be a lot of elderly folks in the world today, more I think now than ever, and at least in the United States, that is. And so, with that demographic shift, is there a major change in the way things are going here from a healthcare perspective? And what are some of those initiatives?
Well, I think you see it's not just the U.S. I mean, U.S., Europe, for the most part, and Asia in many cases are all aging to a great degree, and the need for care globally and the cost of care globally are driving that. We know that a vast majority of the costs of care are in those last few years, the last 10% of lifetime within patients, and so being able to optimize that and focus on that becomes incredibly. There's a great return on that investment because that's where the most acute need is. As well, we're seeing a lot of growth in behavioral issues, cognitive issues with the elderly. Many of those can be handled with remote environments and in a way more efficiently managed, i.e. you can get more visits per buck with a telehealth or remote virtual environment. I know in my own case, both my parents who are in their 80s spend time on virtual health visits. It was so much more convenient for them. Their primary care doctors, cardiologists, and radiologists were hours away or an hour away in some cases by location. That would take a 3-4 hour day, 3 or 4 hours out of their day to drive there, get to the waiting room, see the doctor come back, where they could have direct contacts on a telehealth session. They get ready 10 minutes before the call. They're on the call. Half hour later, they're done. In the comfort of their own home. It was incredibly convenient for them. And I think we're going to see that in a lot of places, right? Access to care is going to be critical. And this is also important, I think, for the distribution and when you think about equity issues, as we move to more telehealth environments, as environments and strategic investments in areas like 5G occur, you can now start to bring very high quality video to almost every inch of the country, which allows us to have much more of a equitable asset distribution for care and telehealth services. So you can really find populations that might not have anything but a regional remote hospital that's an hour or two away. Now they might be able to bring care right to their doorstep. And again, an incredibly powerful opportunity for healthcare to change, particularly in those areas that are remote and need access to care, which is critical for
Interesting
CMS.
point that I can see that it would work for the patient, right? It's much more convenient and much safer to stay at home than it would be to have to go and risk contamination or what have you while you're out at the doctor, and a lot more convenient. But from a doctor's perspective, their age-old dilemma has been to make more money, they need more appointments, right? And so if they can pack these appointments in back to back to back without a lot of travel and a lot of chart time getting people to and from their waiting room, they can really increase their productivity, right?
And two pieces to that. The first is that, yes, they can get to a wide range of customers geographically through the distribution of virtual services. And that really helps them in that effect. We hope that, for example, the time it takes to see a specialist will decrease over time as we start to see those specialists being virtualized in a way where they can get to patients over remote tools, remote access. At the same time, we're also, one of the things we're working on for us is the integration work, making sure it's easier, for example, to capture a message, a voice conversation, a transcript of a telehealth session, screen that, and then add the proper data from those sessions directly in through API development, the EMR system. So to your point, charting is always a problem, but if we can start to automate some of those flows right off the communications infrastructure, which the cloud now offers, you have an incredible dual productivity.
So let's break that down a little bit. Let's break that down. Sorry to interrupt, but you're touching on a very important point, and I want to make sure it's articulated here in its completeness. So you're saying that AI or some kind of machine learning could detect certain information and put it in a chart, right? Or you could start a recording and have the recording go into the chart, and then some text to speech to text translation that would then go into the MRR or the medical record system and be able to capture all that.
Well, if you think about it, radiologists do that today, right? When they're reading a chart, they'll just speak into a system for the most part. But one of the things, and this is where I talked about it earlier, one of the most nascent areas of interest right now is what gets collected now that you have communication tools like RingCentral provides that can basically capture everything in a conversation, in a message, in a virtual health telemedicine session. What do you want to capture? What exposes you to risk? What exposes you to what insights really matter to the care profile for that patient? And that's what we're working on clients with right now, is to try to understand what are those elements to do that. I think you're absolutely right that I believe over time that there will be strong AI tools that'll be able to screen a telehealth session, identify key diagnostic values, and then over the aggregate, start to look at care management and optimization as well. Saying, if we see 1,000 patients through telehealth sessions, what does it speak to? What does the diagnosis and the interaction with the patient speak to, both in quality of care and the diagnosis of care? So I think this would be really interesting activity going on over time. And healthcare professionals just have not had this tool at their disposal before. So we have to rethink that with them. And that's what one of my jobs is, to work with our clients on just that.
That's very interesting. I definitely see this as not a technology issue, but a workflow and a familiarity conversation. It would actually work a lot better for the clients in the long run, because the data that they're going to have is going to be so much more rich and easily accessible. All the different appointments that are happening all over the map throughout that organization are now digitized and put into data and information that they can then make decisions based on, which would better everyone, I would imagine.
Right. And the other big thing, Mike, as you know, is that this is the age of collaboration, right? We've moved, I kind of call it in waves, right? When I moved in 2000 from the East Coast to the West Coast, I moved to Microsoft, I moved to an email culture from a voicemail culture. And that was kind of a sea change, and that happened everywhere. And for the last 20 years, most of us have been within email cultures. Now, the next phase that I see as I move to RingCentral, we are a collaboration company. Our primary interface amongst everybody, all the professionals at RingCentral, is our collaboration tools. Integrated, of course, with Outlook, integrated with all the other tools, but our collaboration is the centerpiece of that. And so I do think that collaboration model brought to healthcare becomes a whole new way to think about care, right? If every specialist you have, for example, is in a RingCentral video group that you can see all the time, that sees the same data, and the radiologist or the x-ray technician enters something or notes into the information, all the doctors who care for that patient see it and can see it for years as you keep that group together, potentially, not only in the facility, but as you keep that care at home. So you have this continuity of care that's really powerful, and that is flexible with the tools of telemedicine and other tools that are out there.
That's very good. I've seen some of those AI tools that are giving the recommendations for folks in use. One of my dentists has a tablet moment after they do the cleaning, after they do the x-ray, things of that nature. An assistant will come in with a tablet, and I can tell on that tablet that there's some information that they've been fed that are likely scenarios that are happening and patterns that are happening, and they're trying to predict things and look for mouth guards and suggest aligners or things of that nature. So they're getting suggested with AI some information there. So I've seen that appear, and that's very interesting that you're thinking about it from a collaboration perspective as well, of being able to present people information on that.
Yeah, and the other thing is, in more of the, I'd say, interesting parts of AI we're seeing as well are dealing with some of the problematic challenges of logistics, right? Scheduling, for example, right? What are the things that are most prevalent in terms of the number of calls coming into a hospital or coming into a doctor's practice or a large practice? How do we manage that call volume, and what can we automate? How do we give consumers a chance to manage their own schedules at the times that they basically work on those, instead of demanding that they call at 8 o'clock on a Monday, self-service, they wait on hold for an hour, right? Which is everyone does today.
So you're talking about self-service. You're talking about the ability to, from my handheld, the smartphone, from my laptop at home, from my tablet at home, be able to book an appointment with a healthcare provider without having to go sit on hold and talk to individuals, or have a call back, which is monumental change for some organizations to even allow you to have a call back, right? So you're taking it to the next level. We call it self-service, right? So that's the nirvana. What are some of the barriers that you see right now to making that happen? Both technology and process.
A lot of it has to do, I think, it's just a matter of the impetus to change and where the drivers are, right? If they see what are the incentives that are driving the clients to get there. I think in a lot of cases, what we're seeing now is this focus on patient experience is becoming more and more powerful. The fact that our government systems, Medicare, gives basically higher reimbursements for higher patient care scores. So it is now being incentive financially, and you see the change start to ripple from those kind of incentive packages and those incentives. So I think there was a little blocking in terms of did it bring us any new customers? Did it bring us any new value? Your schedule's packed, every scheduled appointment's filled, the patients are waiting and they're still stacked, doesn't matter. Now you're seeing maybe different models going forward with accountable care where managing that population is important and making sure that you're optimizing those schedules is important. So I think we're, again, with the changing care model, you're going to see all these tools start to be very, very critical to optimizing the efficiency of your practice as a provider. And that's where I think you're going to see true incentives drive change in that sense. For the most part, as we've been having great success as we start to think through our ability to really help the quality of service and being able to not only integrate the contact center with all the specialists where you can answer questions, for example, on the first call, it also drives a patient experience model that's very powerful.
And so do you see any data yet on people that are using self-service? Any of the clients that are using it, are they saving time in the call center? Are they saving, deflecting calls and making more appointments? Is there any data that's out there yet for some of your clients?
We've got some case studies we've looked at where we've seen, in essence, people saving 10 to 20% per call, right? And for a call center, it's getting thousands of calls. Those are real cost savings to be able to handle at the same quality, to be able to handle that patient, that member in a minute less on a 5-minute call is incredibly useful in terms of cost efficiency over scale. We're also seeing that self-service tools, to your point, when we look at what, it's funny because it's generational, right? Obviously, when you see the results of a survey of what's most important for you from your provider, we see a scale that goes from, obviously, from the greatest generation all the way down to millennials. And of course, as you go down to younger ages, the propensity of value that self-service brings is much higher. So in the 60 or 70% of millennials are looking for self-service tools just like an Amazon app or just like a Facebook app where they can get on their phone, do it real time, and do it when they want to do it, which is how they deal with their life today on their cell phones. And so we understand that, and healthcare has to obviously fit that model because that mind time, that mind share is critical for wellness over time. And you see a lot of people focusing on that.
But it would work in both directions. So the argument is, and I've heard it made by the client, that our older clients want to talk to somebody and they want it to be live, but yet they are still struggling with the hold time because they have too many calls coming into the call center and they're not able to handle them. So if you allow self-service for those that are wanting it, the younger generation, then you're going to free up the call center to be able to handle calls quicker, faster, not keep people on hold. So it's serving a dual purpose.
Oh yeah, it's a holistic cycle, which is nice. As well with callback as well, you can ensure that patient, that elderly patient who wants FaceTime will get the FaceTime they want when there's a rep ready.
Yep. So what are some of the big trends down the line? I'm hearing a lot of hype around RPA or robotic process automation, right? So we make that appointment with that client. Then there's some generated automatic flow that might happen where a chart gets pulled up perhaps or delivered to the doctor ahead of my appointment. I don't know. There's lots of things that can happen there to automate the process, double check if the insurance is valid. All of these kind of things can be done automatically now with bots, right? With robots within the organization's systems. Are you seeing that become a big requirement? Is that part of the conversation today in these strategic RingCentral conversations?
Well, from a comm standpoint, we see automation obviously as a big value set because there's a lot of time spent on what would be repetitive process, right? Where, for example, many doctors will call their insurance company the day before their patients come in and say, I want to go through all 15 patients tomorrow to find out what does their insurance cover or not cover. So I can give the patient an accurate portrayal of what services we can provide and what we can bill and what their obligations are basically out of pocket, that type of thing. And so if you could somehow build tools to allow providers to get that data dynamically from calls off a self-service tool, for example, you really help the process, and you don't tie up operators answering long calls with the doctor's office. So those types of things for payers, for example, and providers are very critical. So I find where we see a lot of the RPA in the short term is on finding out what are those automated processes that we can do that really free up time, because they're basic, they're repetitive, and they basically kill a lot of the call time for unique needs, unique requests from members. And so that's where we see a lot of it happening at this point in time. Yeah. On that sense, in a larger sense, I think we're going to see, as we get to care automation, I think the same thing you're going to see. There's a lot of the more diagnostic tools you see out there in the marketplace. We see them today, whether it's an EKG machine, a glucose tester for diabetics, heart rate monitors, all those things. A lot of IoT you see in athletic wear that's capturing heart rate, it's capturing miles jogged, it's capturing exercise programs.
Wearables,
I think wearables, all this stuff, Apple Watch. You see all this stuff happening out there. So I think over time, we're going to have a much more accurate picture of the patient remotely, and by doing so, doctors will be able to say, this is a healthy population. I am going to maintain them and look for alerts from this group, but I'm not going to focus my time on them because we believe that they're taking good care of themselves. This group over here, which is alarms everywhere, we're going to work on it. We're going to have them come to the office and work on these folks. And that's on a population health standpoint. I think that's going to be important over time. That's critical. You hear about things like virtual emergency rooms, virtual hospitals, the construct of going in, getting diagnosed from a doctor, and then you take home all the diagnostic tools you need, and you basically, the patient room is the home rather than the hospital bed.
Sure. And so the wearables conversation is interesting. I often find that folks, the folks that I hang out with are athletically minded, and they hyperly play gamification, of their sleep patterns and their workouts and
same thing with my friends. Yeah.
All of that kind of fun stuff. So if everybody's got a wearable on and there's plenty of data points to be gathered there, granted they're not all perfect in a perfect world, I'm sure for a doctor, but there could be some very good data points. Do you see doctors being able to pull that data in the near future and being able to make some decisions based on that?
Well, I think you start to see in the electronic medical records environment, you start to see standards being established. Players like Epic, who are one of the dominant players in the space, are starting to find their standards being supported by Apple Watch, for example. So you're starting to see across the board kind of a shared construct of what the medical records are. Obviously, there's verification, validity to some of those things, but over time, I think you're going to find that as these formats and structures align, that the data set will be much richer within the doctor's EMR, so that as they diagnose a patient, they'll have a rich set of data that not only includes obviously maybe the last blood test, the urine test they took, but also the last 5 months EKGs, heart rate, and glucose measurements, so they can really take a look at how that patient's doing across the board. And so I think they will be mainstream. There's a lot of hurdles, I think, to some degree, of ensuring the accuracy, where you take out the risk of litigation and other challenges from that data. And I think it's going to take some time. I think the healthcare system, because it's life and death, is always going to be a slow adopter of that type of technology. But in this sector, I think it's inevitable, and I think the cost and efficiency it'll bring will drive change.
I think so too. There's a lot of data going on. I sat at a table just the other day with a couple of my friends, and everybody was on a different platform, but they were using different technology, but they were all using the data outputs to make decisions in their life. They were making decisions on sleep patterns and time to sleep. They were making decisions based on recovery, when it was time to work out, when it's time not to work out.
Best heart rate for working out. We had an interesting story. My anecdote is, I was just with some friends, actually old college buddies last week, and one of our friends was monitoring his heart rate. And he had he's a good athlete, had a lot of good heart rate, strong heart rate. But he noticed when we got into political discussions, his heart rate went up.
Sure.
So he was watching his heart rate, and where he saw the biggest spike is when we started talking politics.
Yeah, there's no doubt. So avoid it.
Sidebar.
Yes. Avoid listening to the AM radio, and change the topic to something like what you're doing with your wearable.
Right.
Very interesting. So, what are some of the other big trends that RingCentral setting up for right now? Where do you see the biggest changes happening here in healthcare? You've touched on a bunch.
Well, I think that one of the interesting things will be, obviously there's a lot of integration to be done to get to a point where both the healthcare delivery system, payment system, and the patients are all getting what seems to be seamless service. As you know, there's so many players in this space. MedTech is being invested in every year. There's new startups all the time. How do we get to a standard so that we can ensure that, for example, as I said earlier, the medical records are secure, the medical records are consistent, and they really represent true data on a patient? How does that verification occur over time? We're also seeing interesting things in our space. So we're trying to work on, for example, integrating the ecosystem so that the communication data, this asset, which is now the communication between a doctor, a nurse, a patient, amongst other parties in a healthcare exchange, now that we have this asset and it's achievable to capture it, what do we do with this asset? Where does it go? How does it get used? How does it get distributed or analyzed in a way that makes sense? And I think that's where a big trend is going to go in the future. At the same time, we're trying to ensure that this asset can be integrated with the EMR. So we're looking at partners with that. Can be integrated with things like nurse call systems. So on the floor of the hospital, the same device that tells the nurse that someone fell out of bed will have a RingCentral video on it so that she can call a doctor and do a consult real time. So those are the kind of integration of tools to give that individual professional, a nursing professional, a set of options without having to find 3 different pieces of equipment and try to integrate the two and understand the differences. And then finally, we're seeing at the far end, we're starting to see incentives in the marketplace around how we're managing care. So we're working with partners. We're looking at opportunities to generate revenue from this activity. So take all of the back office that used to be done by a doctor to help patients. All of that was predicated on the fact that they had to get that patient in the office to get money from them, right? They had to get a visit. They needed to get butts and seats to get that fee for service. Now we're looking at models where if a doctor is coordinating with a specialist, if the doctor is working with the insurance company or the nursing staff is working with the insurance company, those are potentially being able to generate revenue. And we're seeing Medicare now reimburse doctors for that. So now you have a revenue option as well from communication tools that previously were utilities that now become assets within the environment. So there's some really interesting trends, I think, that are going to drive change and an opportunity to do that with these tools, which is why it came RingCentral. It's an exciting place to be right now.
Well, it's an exciting space to be in. RingCentral is definitely an exciting company as well. A lot of growth at the cutting edge. The call center, we kind of touched on quite a few things here with self-service and automation and telemedicine. But what I found most interesting here so far is a lot of the different revenue streams for the healthcare providers that are out there. Quality of service being one. You mentioned that they could be paid and reimbursed differently depending on how their quality scores are. As far as their patient experience is concerned, that's a big takeaway here. And then, of course, the fact that there are different ways in which they can be reimbursed for their time. They can log it easier when they're on these collaboration calls, right? It's kind of like the old attorney model. You know when you're on the phone if you're recording the call because there's a certain period of time there that you can rebill for that. So there's some of those value things here. Telemedicine, self-service, wearables. We've covered a bunch. This is an exciting space to be in, exciting place. I'm glad you and I had an opportunity to meet. And I wanted to find out, what did you do during your experience at Gartner? What was the role there? I know a lot of folks put a lot of money into Gartner. We use Gartner to separate the players from the wannabes, if you will. In spaces and markets. And so what was your experience there and what did you do?
Well, it was funny. Gartner is an amazing place in the sense of the breadth and scope of the technology it looks at. And that's one of the reasons I went there. I was the CEO of a small turnaround company in Manhattan. I'd moved from the West Coast to the East Coast, landed in Manhattan with my wife. We're living in the city downtown. And I had this small company I turned around, but it's very focused on oral health analytics. And well, it's a great company and we were able to kind of set it on the right path going forward. I had used Gartner services when I was a CIO at Delta Dental, and I found that the breadth of thinking around that was pretty fascinating. And so they were recruiting me. So I came in 2013. I joined there as what's called an executive partner. And that role is really to be a consult to the CIOs. You had a portfolio of companies you worked with, primarily the CIOs within those companies. And the goal was to take the research across all of Gartner and apply that to the technology challenges of those professionals and help them use the research to make decisions about, in some cases, just straight purchases and what's the best quality product to purchase, like the Magic Quadrant at the time. Or more kind of esoterically, how do you think through strategy? What is digital transformation? What does it mean? So we spent a lot of time, and again, my portfolio was about 40% healthcare at the time as well, payers, providers, life science. So I was working with CIOs every day on how do we think about digital transformation? What does it mean, right? And they were very defined. What Gartner did very well is define that step process where not digitalization, where you just put things into databases and make them automated, but more, how do you change, as we talked about earlier, the work model and the operational model changes? That's when transformation starts to occur. And so that type of thing, I cut my teeth on for about 6 or 7 years. And so it was great to kind of see the breadth of that. And so when the RingCentral opportunity came to me to basically take and apply that research to, I think, a tool that's going to be a catalyst for this change, I couldn't pass it up. And so I'm bringing all that experience to this marketplace around the comm systems. And it's been very, very exciting.
Yeah, you're at a pretty dynamic company. They move fast and they react quickly, and you'll be able to do plenty of that implementation as these topics come alive and come available for customers. It's the transformation of the workflow that's the big challenge, right? People resist change. I think it's just a natural entity, and companies resist change more systematically, and especially in healthcare, there's a lot of this is the way it has to be kind of conversation, because that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it's been. Our required reporting is, and you don't understand our business because we have to do the following things. So some of those conversations you brought up today about the change in process and change in flow, even though it could mean more revenue, more appointments, less cost of doing business traditionally, even with all of those things, there'll still be some resistance for the folks, but we can definitely show them the way.
Certainly, and like I said, the irony of this terrible pandemic is that I think it opened a lot of eyes in healthcare to there's another way to manage care. There's other ways to really think creatively about delivering care, and I think that will bear fruit over time, and hopefully will be a big part of that.
I agree. John, I sure appreciate you taking time to talk with us on the boardroom sessions, and look forward to the conversations with you and RingCentral.
Great speaking to you, Mike. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We'll put your contact information here in the show notes, and anybody who wants to reach out can definitely reach out. And again, thank you for the time. Hey, Mike here. Hope you liked this boardroom session. Please check back to your future sessions as we're recording a new one every month. If you want to reach out, look for me on LinkedIn or send me a note at mike@sidepath.com. That's Mike at SIDEPATH.com.